Okay, let's take a look at chapter 3, getting the job. So this presentation is a little bit long. I'm going to skip through some of these slides because I think they're unnecessarily detailed. And if you take a look at the book chapter, it'll go in some more depth on that. But we're going to look at getting an interview and then applying, interviewing, and following up after an interview. So that's what this chapter is going to be focused on. We're going to talk a little bit about how to prepare an application letter, how to prepare a resume, and then the importance of references in this first part of the chapter. So, looking at getting the interview. So, one thing to keep in mind is what's called an application or a cover letter. It introduces you to a potential employer. So, basically, it should go with your resume. It introduces you before they look through your work history. It's kind of like, think of it like a sell. You're selling yourself. You're selling your qualifications. You're creating interest in your own resume, trying to make a good first impression. So when we're thinking about writing an application letter, you want to think about being specific, presenting yourself as interesting as possible, and being direct. So generally in an application letter or a cover letter, it would be split into 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph, you're explaining why you're writing, purpose of the letter, you're being specific, telling them what job you want. So you're going to specifically say the job, you're going to say why you want it, you're going to say specifics about that. The middle paragraph, why you're a good choice for the job, explain your key qualifications, express interest in the company, describe experiences, classes, or skills that relate to the job, be enthusiastic about your interest in the job. And then lastly, you want to wrap up in a friendly but assertive way. Ask for an interview, give them your phone number, make it clear you want an opportunity to discuss the position, sell yourself as much as possible in those 3 paragraphs. I'm not going to go through all of these things in detail. This is telling you what kind of paper to use, the envelope, all of that. Use your best judgment, but if you want to pause while I'm going through these, you can, but this is all also in the book. You should hopefully know what a return and letter address is. If you don't, look it up, talk to your parents. Different parts, the salutation, the body, the compliment, complimentary close. This is kind of basic letter writing. There you go. That's the return address. That's the letter address. That's the salutation. Another thing you might want to think about is doing an email application. So same things might apply. Just make sure you're using plain text. Just format it correctly. Again, just going through how to write an email application letter. You can pause it if you want. I'm not going to walk through all these things. This is how to write an email. Obviously, this was designed a long time ago. Okay, secondly, a resume. So after you have an application letter or a cover letter, you want to think about your resume, which describes your work experiences, your education, your abilities, your interests, other information that might be of interest to an employer. Um, so you want to really make sure that this is well organized and easy to read. The purpose of the resume is to tell them who you are, what you can do, and what your special interests are. You want to make your resume simple, straightforward, but to stick out as much as possible as well. So, general guidelines, keep it to 1 page. You want to include all the information that's pertinent or related to the job for which you're applying. So, you may need to sift through all of your experience and just pick the most important or relevant experiences. Choose a format that's easy to look at, easy to read. Make sure you're proofreading. If employees are looking at resume and they see spelling mistakes or grammar mistakes, they're probably just going to throw yours away and move on to the next one in the pile, especially if it's a job that is highly sought after. Use good quality paper, use a good printer. All of these things might not seem like a big deal, but anything that can give you an edge or an advantage. The parts of the resume, just going to walk through real quick. This is what it might look like. Your name at the top, address, phone number, email. Career objective is a short statement that includes kind of what your goal is in your career. Education is important to include, GPA, different accomplishments, relevant coursework, relevant skills, experience in work that is relevant to the job. And then the last thing to think about are references, which we'll get to in a second. So you want to use standard font, 11 or 12 point. Think about headings, just formatting it properly. Avoid fancy fonts, italics, underlined, condensed type, shadowing, shadows, white type on black background. Like, avoid trying to do too much or trying to make it too fancy. Make it easy to read, make it easy to digest, and don't put too much on the page at one time. Other important thing are references. These are people who've known you for at least a year and can provide information about your skills and character and achievements. So these are people that the potential employer could call to get a sense of who you are, and that could speak well of you. Make sure you ask permission before you list people as references on your resume. It would not be a good idea for you to list somebody, have your potential employer call them, and then be completely caught off guard by it. That would not really reflect well on you. You could also say references available upon request, which would mean that you don't want to necessarily list people's names, but the employer could ask you, but you want to make sure you have them available if they do ask you. And a reference letter is something you could include in an application. It's a pre-written letter attesting to your character or abilities or whatever. And it might be helpful to have those ahead of time so that you could give them as part of your application. Okay, second part quickly, applying, interviewing, and following up. We're going to look at steps for properly completing an employment application form, explaining how to prepare for and make a good impression on a job interview, and preparing a thank you letter as a follow-up. So a job application asks you questions about people who are applying for a job. Um, you could use pen to fill out a paper form. That's too detailed. Most of them are going to be online. You might be able to go into a business and they'll give you a paper form to fill out. There's other ways to do it. Make sure you're writing neatly, fill in all the blanks, be truthful, etc. The interview then is a face-to-face meeting. Prepare for the interview. Don't just fill out the application and then try to wing it. Prepare for the interview. Learn about the company. Be prepared to answer their questions. Be prepared to answer open-ended questions. Talk to maybe somebody else who's gotten a job at this company if you can. Ask them what kind of questions were asked to get a sense of what to do. Bring copies of your resume, of your reference letters, of your transcripts, which are your school records that include a list of the courses you've taken with credits and grades. Bring paper and pen, any information. Keep yourself organized so that you can just focus on doing well in the interview. Just a few things, tips for making a good first impression. Arrive on time. That would be arriving early, really. Make sure you dress appropriately. It's always better to dress up than to dress down. Dress maybe more formally than you think you need to. It'll help you stand out. Go alone. It doesn't look professional if your mom's there with you. Make sure you're prepared as much as possible. Be confident in yourself. Be courteous and respectful. It's okay to take a beat if somebody asks you a question and you need to think about it for a second. That's okay. Don't just start answering without knowing what you're talking about. Be enthusiastic. Look for social cues, etc. It's important to do a follow-up. A lot of times, if you're on the next track to potentially get a job, it's important for you to follow up and say, hey, again, just a reminder of who I am. A thank you letter shows appreciation for taking the time. It's helpful to do that. Maybe sending a thank you letter, thank you email after your interview. Remind them of your interview, of your interest, your eagerness to hear from them, etc. So that wraps up the looking for a job and writing a resume and etc. And next, chapter 4, we'll look at some more topics related to that.